Today I am covering another UFO sighting. But on November 7th, 2006, a strange flying saucer in the sky did appear, and it was on one of the most closely monitored places on Earth, the O'Hare Airport in Chicago. To this day, there's no other credible explanation except that this really was a UFO that multiple people saw. At about 4:30 p.m. on the 7th, back in 2006, one airport worker was standing on the tarmac near an airplane. James looks straight up and he saw something hovering above him in the sky. Now, it was hard for James to tell how high up it was. All he knew for sure was that it was below the lowest clouds. The thing looks like a flying disc or a frisbee, but it's not moving around or coming in for landing. It is just sitting still in midair. Now, James couldn't hear any engines or any other sounds, and he didn't see any lights on the object. It was just this strange flying saucer, and it was directly above his head. So he radioed ground control to describe what he was seeing and ask if anyone knew what it is. I mean, this is his job, right? We're at an airport. A random object can't just be floating in the sky. Now, around this same time at the airport, a mechanic was working near their gate. He also saw the unidentified craft. He later described the sighting to a reporter saying, quote, "I tend to be scientific by nature, and I don't understand why aliens would hover over a busy airport. But I know that what I saw and what a lot of other people saw that day stood out very clearly." Now, based on what some witnesses said, it seemed like the saucer was hovering right in the control tower's blind spot. Now, interestingly enough, though, the employees in ground control checked their radar equipment and other monitors after they couldn't visually see it, and all of the machinery also said nothing was there. But so far as everyone else was concerned, this thing was highly visible. Now, one gate worker was in his office when the sighting began. So this officer actually runs out onto the concourse and looks up. He wasn't actually expecting to see an alien, but instead he peered through the huge windows and skylights and he sees the flying saucer. There were a few small inconsistencies from one telling to the next. For example, some people thought the disc was spinning while others thought it was just hovering. And some people thought the ship was pretty small, maybe just 6 feet across, but others described it as being maybe 24 feet in diameter. That would make it a little bigger than a 15-passenger van. Inconsistencies aside, overall, it sounded like everyone was roughly saying the same thing. The next story comes from a woman whose identity has not been released to the public. Keep things simple, I'm gonna call her Lisa. Lisa was on her way to the airport with a friend who I'm gonna call Penny. She was just right outside the airport when she sees the craft in the sky. All she could tell was that its top seemed to be shiny or reflective, and the bottom was a dull gray. She could see other people in other cars pull out their phones, because again, this is 2006, to record the craft or try to take pictures. She didn't want to do the same thing. She wanted to look at the vessel in a safe way. There was a huge crowd gathered on the sidewalk, everyone staring straight up. One clump of about 7 people had broken off from the others, and one of those 7 people, a man, was trying to capture a photo of what they were seeing, but it was too dark and it was too far away. All of his shots were turning out blurry. And there's one other thing I need to mention about Lisa, okay? Her father was a member of the military. So growing up, she had spent a lot of time on or near different bases, and she'd seen a ton of different aircraft taking off and landing. When Lisa watched this thing though, it didn't look like any kind of vehicle she'd ever seen before. Lisa believed she was watching an alien visitor, that this thing in the sky had not come from Earth. Lisa said she stood and watched it for like 13 to 14 minutes. Eventually, as everyone's watching, the flying disc shot straight upward, just blasting into the sky. The group who were standing with Lisa actually gasped in surprise when they saw it, like multiple people. And Lisa felt a tingly sensation on her skin, like there was electricity in the air. While the vessel was departing, it zipped through a cloud with so much force that it actually left an opening in the cloud in its wake. It was like somebody punched a hole in the sky. It would have been very difficult for anyone to deny that this was a real sighting of an actual alien spaceship, but like everything everything, that's exactly what happened. See, in the weeks and months after the sighting, the eyewitnesses at the airport kept following up with their bosses and officials at the airport. So these people kept asking, has anyone figured out what we saw? Was that a flying saucer? Anytime anyone asked about the incident, the authorities just said the same thing. They had no records of any sighting on November 7th. This was in spite of the fact that approximately 12 people formally reported the sighting. All of these witnesses had reported what they'd seen, but the officials at the airport and with the FAA were saying, we don't know anything about this. There's no record of any UFOs at O'Hare. Like I said, approximately 12 separate people had filed reports. Seemed too unlikely that dozen files would just happen to go missing on accident. But also, even without those reports, the airport should have other evidence of the UFO. If you remember, the radio had been blowing up with chatter that day of people seeing it. So the O'Hare investigators should have had tapes of all of these conversations, even if nobody had ever reported anything unusual. One of the first radio calls had come from a woman who worked with United Airlines. She'd called a ground control employee named Dave. She identified herself as Sue. Then she asked the controllers, quote, "Hey, did you see a flying disc out by gate C-17?
Sorry, this is Dave.
Hey, did you see a flying disc out by C-17?
Don't even start, Sue. You're seeing flying discs.
Well, that's what the pilot and the ramp guys are telling us. The C-17, they saw some flying disc above it. We can't see above us.
Come on, Sue.
You didn't see it, right?
Hey, you guys been celebrating the holidays already over there or what? You having a Christmas party today?
She and Dave share a chuckle. It's a huge joke. Dave confirms, I haven't seen anything, Sue. In a different call, a control tower operator asked another staffer, hey, did you see anything above United's concourse?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, look out your window. Do you see anything above United's concourse? They actually, believe it or not, they called us and said that somebody observed a flying disc about 1,000 feet above the gate Charlie 17. You see anything over there?
No, we saw it a half hour ago.
Literally right there on tape, they acknowledged that multiple employees had seen this saucer. When the ground control employee asked who exactly had spotted it, the other man on the radio is like, a bunch of us. There were pilots who had been rerouted away from gate C-17, which was very near the area where the saucer was supposedly hovering. Ground control had told them that they needed to land or take off from a different gate because of an unidentified object in the airspace. There still should have been a ton of documentation and records related to those sightings and the reroutings. You cannot have a strange unidentified object flying over major airports. Airport policy said that there should have been some kind of investigation. But here the officials were saying they had no idea what everyone was talking about. The airport employees were frustrated. And honestly, that's putting it mildly after this. They felt like their testimony was being ignored and like their bosses were gaslighting them. They wanted people to know, no, we really did see something this day, no matter how many people are trying to cover it up. They began reaching out to other people. This included individuals who had nothing to do with the airport or aviation. One eyewitness, an O'Hare-based manager who refused to share their real name, wrote a description of what they'd seen and submitted it to a UFO organization. It was a brief story about how they were working in the airport, looked out the window, saw the object. The organization decided to publish the story on their website. It was the first public leak about what had happened at this airport. A bunch of people don't believe in UFOs. They don't find anonymous accounts on the internet particularly credible. But other witnesses contacted reporters and newspapers hoping someone would write a story. A bunch of them ended up talking to John Hilkovich, who was a journalist with the Chicago Tribune.
Every major country, it seems, people have written in, both those who claims they've spotted UFOs during their life, as well as serious researchers. I mean, just the last 2 days, this is my email. So it's just a story that has legs, and people are fascinated by the thought, and I think there's some belief that there are advanced life forms that are visiting us here on a regular basis.
And on New Year's Day in 2007, he published an article with the title, "In the Sky, a Bird, a Plane, a UFO?" It was a very detailed account of the sightings that had happened nearly 2 months earlier in the previous November. It said, you did experience something real. A lot of people also experienced it, and there are people out there who believe you. Here's where this story gets really interesting. John reached out to O'Hare officials to ask, hey, do you have any records? What happened? What's your take? What is the official word? And their answer was the same thing they had been telling employees. They claimed they didn't have any records of a UFO sighting. There was nothing to say. After this article got published, some people filed Freedom of Information requests on the airport's records. The Freedom of Information Act releases showed that not only had the officials received all 12 of those UFO reports, so they lied to their own employees, they had already investigated them, according to their files as well. The investigation had begun the day after the sighting on November 8th, and within the next 2 days, they had abruptly closed the case without solving it. This release put the officials in an uncomfortable position. They come forward now with an official statement saying the UFOs had been a trick of the light. And as for the cloud that got a hole in it, they agreed, yeah, a flying object probably did create that opening, but they said it was just from an ordinary airplane taking off. It's also worth noting that it is technically possible for airplanes to tear holes in clouds, just like what the officials said. Except again, the employees at O'Hare were used to this. They knew what those holes looked like. And they knew that the opening from November 7th, the account about the O'Hare unidentified flying object hit the public. And then pranksters and practical jokers swooped in. When the people posted the pictures, every single one of them was obviously Photoshopped. It made it much harder for journalists and everyone else to sort through what was real and what wasn't. I'll also note that to this day, nobody has shared a credible photo of the O'Hare UFO. Their thinking was that if dozens of people had seen this thing, someone should have at least snapped a picture. It is always so shocking to me when multiple, like more than 12 official employees come forward to say they have seen something, and in history, it just doesn't exist.